everybody, welcome back to the program. Today we're going to talk about the Near East and southeastern Kazakhstan. So apparently there was a thriving pastoralist economy in eastern Kazakhstan around 2700 BC. Sound like nothing to you guys, but that's actually pushing back the dates of stuff like agriculture and domestication of goats and sheep in that area back a few hundred years. It's centered around this site called, or this area called Bagash, which is, let me pull up a map here. Again, southeastern Kazakhstan. So if you guys recognize Almaty, which is a big city now, it's a few miles northeast of this area, right next to the mountains here. And these mountains, again, to this day are home to modern pastoralists who have carried on these traditions of herding and living off the mountainous region here year round. And these were the same types of traditions that were alive and well 5,000 years or so ago, over 5,000 years ago. They found that millet, which was a grain that originated in the Yellow River in China and was domesticated about 8,000, 9,000 BC, which so happens to be the same time that they think goat and sheep were domesticated as well. Now, I don't think those are the true dates. I think those are just the dates that we have hard evidence for, because that seems like a really interesting coincidence that these two life forms were domesticated by humans and are integral to each other's survival. Now, what does that mean? Well, during the winter time in this region here, they need to feed, the pastoralists need to feed their animals some sort of fodder to get through the winter, because it gets unbelievably cold. And so they knew this way back then as well, and they either imported the millet or they're not sure exactly, but this millet that, again, derives from way inside China over here near the Yellow River, made its way all the way west as far as Kazakhstan now. So again, this doesn't mean that 2700 BC was when they started doing this. This is when they just found it in the sheep remains, that their isotope ratios, which we'll get into later. So in this area called Bagash, there's this newly discovered Dali settlement, and this is where they found these skeletal remains of sheep and goats that gave them these dates that I was talking about earlier, the 2700 BC date. So they were fed this millet, and they were spreading westward, and you can see this is a map of the spread of this millet here. So this green area is the Yellow River Basin, and you can see it goes here westward. Well, there should be an arrow here pointing westward toward Mongolia and then through the steppe and into Kazakhstan. That's what this article is about. They have to adjust this map now to put a new arrow here. So there's a new route that this millet traveled, and it wasn't just to India, to the southwest. It also went northwest as well. So yeah, we talked about the it's surprisingly rare for bodies to survive and have this isotope ratio that indicates that they were fed this millet, because again, millet did have a very specific signature that it made when consumed inside remains of humans. But since they couldn't find humans from back then, they started to use goats and animals, domesticated animals, and from there they kind of had a shortcut because a domesticated animal won't just be there. That suggests that a human was there to domesticate the animal. So even though they don't have a human body, they could just carbonate its pet and then come to pretty much the same conclusions about human settlements and stuff like that. So this is what one of the authors of the study says. He says a thriving pastoralist economy using Chinese millets at 2700 BC is a massive leap forward in understanding the earliest food globalization processes in Eurasia. And that's what this is about, food globalization process. So if you take a snapshot of history back then, over 5,200 years ago, you would expect that people were living in their own pockets. They weren't really connected like people are connected now. But the fact that Chinese millets are being found here suggests that they probably were traveling elsewhere. And I mean, that's a lot of ground to cover if you just look at the map here. That's many thousands of miles. And they didn't have cars back then either, so there must have been some sort of established route that they were taking, and there was probably some sort of trade going on. But the chronology of the site before this discovery, this Bagash site, this Dali site, the earliest period was 2460 BC. So again, that's short of the new date. And what they found was a stone structure. Okay, so you can't date stones. So Lord knows how long the stone structure was there before. And in the burials, they found domesticated animal remains. There's a ton of them, and there were some cattle remains as well. And then these millet seeds were found in the burials as well. But the problem with that was they didn't know where those millet seeds came from. They didn't know if they got them from trade. They don't know if they were gifts, or they didn't know if they were being cultivated there right then and there. So again, this is an early date, and it's the earliest dated evidence of millet spreading out of China. So if we refer back to this map here, you have the Fertile Crescent here, which is supposed to have, agriculture was supposed to have happened about like 9,000 BC around here. And then China was supposed to be about 7,000 to 8,000 BC. So these are the established dates, and people are becoming more and more leery of these dates because it suggests, if you were to take this as evidence, like absolute evidence, that means everything came out of the Fertile Crescent first. And again, we only have the hard evidence that suggests that was the case, but there's a ton of stuff that's slipping through our fingers that might indicate otherwise. I did the video on India last time, and there was a lot of, I'm surprised at the traction of that video, and a lot of the comments were saying that they were insisting that India was one of the places that agriculture started earlier than the Fertile Crescent. So I saw a lot of the links, and I was reading a lot of the discussion about that, and I thought it was very interesting. So again, the fact that this date is being pushed back, and people were feeding this domesticated fodder to their goats indicates that maybe there's a different story here. Maybe it didn't all come from Turkey. Maybe a number of different theories can hold weight now, like the spontaneously independent rise of agricultural centers. So China could be one, the Fertile Crescent could be one, India could be one, judging by all what everyone's saying. New Guinea might be another one. So again, we just have a bunch of jigsaw pieces that are put together, but we haven't had a whole image come up, a clear image indicating exactly what happened. So again, this is another piece of the puzzle if you want to think about it that way. So again, sheep and goat were originally domesticated in the Near East 10,000 years ago, and these crops coincidentally these millet crops were coincidentally domesticated at around the same time. And here, one theory that I think is very compelling in this case is maybe domestication happens, and then but it has to be an ongoing process. Otherwise, those domesticated animals will revert back to being the wild, untamed animals. And the explanations for those types of interruptions in domestication could probably be attributed to climate change, catastrophic climate change, or like a comet impact or a flood, volcanic eruption, all kinds of different types of natural disasters. And if that's true, that would make a lot of sense. So maybe the most recent domestication was 10,000 years ago, but maybe they were domesticated even further back. That could be a possibility as well. And then when you think about Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, the sister site which is being excavated now, if you think of them as centers of learning these techniques, then that would make sense that knowledge would derive even further back, perhaps even in remote history. That's something I didn't think about anyway. So this another thing that would make that and if you look in retrospect, the development of the Silk Road here, this would make a lot of sense in light of this discovery, because these people were just they probably knew of these routes for thousands and thousands of years earlier, but it wasn't documented until way later, because this is a very very long road that connects the North Korean peninsula all the way to Genoa, Italy. That's really really far. So did they just suddenly did one guy or one group of people just create this, or was it more of a word of mouth thing until it reached the number of people who knew about it reached a critical mass, and then it just became a commonly used road, I guess a mainstream route to for intercontinental travel. So again, that's very interesting. The development of the Silk Road is another. It being based on more ancient trade routes and more ancient pastoralist routes is a very intriguing topic that would probably make for a better video later. So the exact timing of moving crops through this continental crossroads and the case for farming has remained elusive. The previous research showed archaeobotanical remains of wheat and millet in human burials around 2300 BC. That's what I was talking about earlier at the Dali site. Or not the Dali site, other sites in Bagash, and that's around 2300 to 2400 BC. There was no concrete evidence to show whether these were trade items or farmed locally, and that's what this study is drawing upon, these excavations that are showing this relationship here. So, so the Dali settlement it's still open to speculation about the integration of intensive farming, especially among the early Bronze Age herders, and whether these grains made it into their diet, but they know for sure that they were in the diet of their domesticated goats. And again, it's because of the distinct carbon isotopic signature that distinguishes it from other crops. So it's a very specific signature, and they traced the consumption of millet can be traced in the isotope ratios of humans, but again, those remains are very, very, very rare. And so the way around the problem is they took the isotopes of livestock, and then they came to the conclusions that way. And this is not an arbitrary assumption here, because the modern pastoralists, again, they practice the same thing. They give their animals fodder in order to ensure their survival through the winter. And this is just a very, very ancient practice that has proven to work for thousands of years. So again, the composition of ancient sheep and cattle, and again, they're everywhere. There's ancient sheep and cattle everywhere in the mountains. There's so many sites that have these, in which they found these domesticated animals, and it shows how large a scale of millet cultivation must have been, because it was large enough to provide for animals throughout the winter months. And if you think about it, where's that map here? Okay. People have been able to live that same kind of life for thousands of years, through the Roman Empire, through ancient Egypt, or right up until like the Indus Valley. Like that, we're talking that old here, and to this day that they're still able to follow these practices and still live and thrive. So this is a tried and true method, and they knew about a large-scale millet cultivation. So in order for that to be sustainable, they needed a source of millet, and this millet again comes all the way from China. The Yellow River is right here. Look how far that is. So that's been going on uninterrupted for thousands and thousands of years. And another thing that you see is a wide range of variation in the intensity of this millet foddering strategy. So there's a large degree of flexibility. So they're very lucky to have either lucky or it was planned or whatever it was. It's a very clever way to survive some of the harsh winters, because again, you don't really know how harsh the winter is going to be. every year when winter comes there, it could either be a lot worse, or it could be not that bad, and there's really no way of them predicting what would be. So just them having a store of millet and the large scale of it is just incredible, because they never changed. The people who lived at Dali and Bagash were shifting their herding and farming strategies year to year, depending on environment or social circumstances, which gave them critical advantages in ensuring their food security. Yeah, I just mentioned that. They must have had some high level of stability for no one to really mess with them. Even through Genghis Khan and the Mongolian invasions, they still kept their culture. They still kept their society together and intact. And that might be because the Mongols just didn't see any reason to kill them. So that's very, very interesting as well, that they just were able to weather all of that social upheaval during those times. The study clearly links the westward dispersal of millets, a key indigenous crop of Chinese civilization, to livestock herding by pastoralists in Kazakhstan who use farming to enhance their animal-focused worlds. And of course, it was a prize crop, and it still is a prize crop for keeping healthy herds and better pastoralist practices. And you see the same pastoralist practices all over. In India, I talked about the Green Sahara pastoralists before the Sahara turned into a desert. So these are very, very ancient domestication, varying levels of agriculture. So it seems to indicate some sort of unified culture a long time ago. If you want to assume that these practices were at some point had a common origin. Common origin meaning some group of humans figured it all out, maybe super advanced humans, or if it was a word of God, if you want to believe that, if you want to believe in this more metaphysical or supernatural aspects. Either way, there are two definite perspectives here. Either that everything emerged not simultaneously, but independently of each other, and they just happen to be the very similar practices of, again, domestication and agriculture, or it came from one single group or entity or single origin idea base, whatever you want to call that. And Göbekli Tepe could be one of those centers of education that derives from that central origin of knowledge. Either way, is very fascinating stuff, and they covered so much ground here. So yeah, just leave a comment what you guys think. The India video was very, very surprising. I'm surprised that so many of you had opinions on that. So this video is a very interesting corollary to that one, because again, we're talking about the same regions. India might have had a part in this, and India as well. The pastoralists down there use this Chinese millet. Just looking at this map here. So yeah, leave a comment. Check out the article yourself. Do some extra research and keep those comments coming.